Coalition. Thanks for joining our webinar today on opportunities to align the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, employment and training with other workforce development programs under the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Before I get started, I'd like to give some background on National Skills Coalition's vision and mission. Next slide. Great. So National Skills Coalition seeks an America that grows its economy by investing in its people so that every worker and every industry has the skills to compete and prosper. Next slide. We achieve this vision by organizing broad-based coalitions, advocating for public policies that invest in what works, and communicating our goals to an American public. Next slide, please. So today we're going to focus on new opportunities that are created by WIOA to align SNAP employment and training, which I'm going to call SNAP E&T from here on out, to align SNAP E&T with other workforce programs so that participants can build their skills and find family supporting jobs. As Yuri mentioned, we've produced a fact sheet on this topic. This webinar is the last in a series of 4 Aligned by Design webinars. The others focused on alignment between WIOA and career and technical education, adult education, and temporary assistance for needy families. And recordings of these webinars can be found on NSC's website along with fact sheets on each of those topics. I'd also like to let folks know that Aligned by Design series is part of a larger set of NSC's WIOA resources. We've developed a playbook for creating effective state plans and a case study of WIOA state planning in New Jersey. And we hope that all of these resources, including today's webinar and fact sheet, serve as useful tools to you as you engage in WIOA planning in your state. Next slide, please. So today I'm lucky to be joined on the webinar by a knowledgeable and experienced panel of researchers, practitioners, and advocates. Let me give a little bit of background on the structure of the webinar. I'm going to start the discussion by providing some background on WIOA and SNAP employment and training and opportunities for alignment between the two. Then I'm going to turn it over to Ed Bolen, Senior Policy Analyst at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Ed will be discussing how SNAP E&T fits into the broader SNAP program, as well as some opportunities and challenges for workforce partnerships within that context. We're then going to turn to Bill Seedman and Alice Pritchard, who are going to be sharing background on their experience from Connecticut. Bill Seedman is a public assistance consultant with the Connecticut Department of Social Services, and Alice Pritchard is the Executive Director of the Connecticut Women's Education and Legal Fund. After we hear from the panelists, I'll moderate a discussion with them on some of the key alignment opportunities for WIOA and SNAP employment and training. Next slide, please. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to WIOA, I'm going to give a bit of background on the Act. It was passed into law in July of last year, and it supersedes the Workforce Investment Act. It's really the first major piece of federal workforce development legislation that has been passed in about 16 years, and so it's really landmark legislation for that reason that will set the framework for workforce development in the states moving forward. Many of WIOA's provisions started to take effect earlier this month, and state planning, which I'll be talking about later, is currently in progress. For those who aren't familiar with WIOA, I want to let you know that it has 4 titles. Title I, programs for adults, dislocated workers, and youth. Title II covers adult education and family literacy. Title III is Wagner-Pizer Employment Service, and Title IV is vocational rehabilitation. I think one of WIOA's notable features is its emphasis on alignment, not just across those 4 titles that I just described, but also across a variety of federal workforce, education, and training programs more broadly. From certain provisions on state plans to those on the OneStop delivery system, WIOA really does underscore opportunities to build a workforce system across programs that are oftentimes administered by different agencies in the states. And SNAP employment and training is, of course, one of these programs that can be included in the collaboration across the state's workforce programs and systems under the new law. Next slide, please. So similarly, just to give a bit of background on SNAP E&T, The SNAP E&T program is a federal program that can provide a range of employment and training services to SNAP participants. These can include things like job search, adult education, vocational training, and work experience. States receive federal formula grants to administer the program. They're also eligible for 50/50 reimbursement grants. And through these 50/50 funds, the federal government can reimburse states for up to 50% of certain non-federal SNAP E&T program costs, such as costs for adult education and training, and certain supportive services that are necessary for individuals to participate in SNAP E&T, such as child care, transportation, books, and supplies. SNAP E&T programs can use these resources to partner with third-party providers such as community colleges and community-based organizations, and in doing so, they can expand SNAP participants' access to programs that can help them build skills and find family-supporting jobs. We're going to be talking about this more on today's webinar, but there are also additional resources on NSE's website for those who are interested in learning more about skills-based SNAP E&T programs. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, NSE issued a fact sheet on opportunities for alignment between SNAP E&T and workforce development partners under WIOA. The topics that you see bulleted here on this slide are covered in the fact sheet. And I'm not going to go through all of them now since we'll be discussing these topics with the panelists throughout the webinar. However, I do want to highlight the first bullet on state plans since that frames much of the conversation that's happening in the states right now. So under WIOA, states must develop comprehensive workforce plans, and these plans are due to the federal government in March of 2016. So that process is underway right now. And states have two options for plans. They can develop a unified plan that includes the operational plans for the core programs under WIOA's 4 titles, which I described earlier, or they can develop expanded combined plans that include operational plans for one or more federal programs in addition to WIOA's core programs. SNAP E&T is one of the additional federal programs that can be covered in a combined plan. Both of these types of plans, regardless if it's a unified plan or a combined plan, both need to have a strategic plan that describes the state's vision for workforce development, the key strategies that support that vision, and how various federal and state programs are going to work together to carry out those strategies. So regardless of if a state submits a unified plan or a combined plan, this strategic portion of the plan really provides an opportunity for states to describe the role of SNAP E&T in their key workforce development strategies. And the planning process for creating the plan provides a forum for SNAP E&T administrators and provider organizations to participate in the planning process and identify opportunities to collaborate with other partners, and these could be partners like the American Job Centers, but it could also be other education and training providers. As I said, many states are in the process of developing their plans, so we hope today's webinar will give you ideas to inform your state plans. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed, who's going to discuss how SNAP E&T fits into the broader SNAP program, as well as some of the key opportunities and challenges that SNAP E&T is facing in regard to some of the collaboration that we see listed here. Ed?
Thanks, Brooke. So my name is Ed Bolen. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And I'd like to thank the National Skills Coalition for putting this together and allowing me to speak. I'm going to just say a few words from the sort of SNAP side of things, from like a SNAP agency perspective at a state level, or anti-hunger groups, food banks, people who work with the SNAP program and how they see SNAP employment and training and some of the challenges in working with the workforce development field. Next slide, please. I think it's helpful to keep in mind, of course, that employment and training in SNAP is a program. It's a dedicated program and set of rules, but it's sort of embedded in the nation's largest nutrition program. About $80 billion funds SNAP each year, slightly lower now, and about $250 million funds employment and training, just to give you a perspective of employment and training within the SNAP world. But given that, you know, some states are very dedicated to employment and training efforts within the SNAP population and are looking for ways to improve their programs and to provide services to particularly targeted groups. So I thought it would be helpful to sort of break out 3 common ways that states use or think of SNAP E&T. The first would be a way of testing an individual's willingness to work. And that's basically the idea that if you're going to be getting public benefits, you need to do something for them. So what that means in the SNAP E&T world is mandatory or required employment and training. In other words, the state agency assigns somebody to do something. And there can be a sanction for failing to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about what that might look like. But that essentially puts a very low-income person's food assistance at risk if they're unable to do the employment and training activity that they're assigned by the state. That usually takes the form of job search, work fair, kind of low touch, not too expensive programs that the research, which in SNAP E&T is very scarce, but the research that is out there shows, has very limited sort of impacts on long-term earnings and connecting people to sustainable jobs. Very popular, though, within the SNAP E&T world in a number of states. Another way that states use SNAP employment and training is to provide unemployed childless adults with a way to keep their benefits. Those adults are called ABODs. I'll talk more about them, but it's very important to keep in mind that there's a rule in SNAP that it's the only time limit in SNAP, but it limits the amount of benefits that somebody can get unless they're doing work or certain kinds of job training. So some states will say, whoa, we want to make sure that individuals have a chance to keep their food assistance, so we're going to figure out how to provide those people with a chance to do so. And then the third sort of way of thinking of SNAP E&T is perhaps a more traditional workforce approach, which is to think of providing services and supports, programs to improve an individual's skills and work experience. And that's job training activities, education, and support services that help people to participate in those kinds of programs. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thanks. And so SNAP has rules around work, and just so you know, the population that of SNAP participants who might be a part of the state's employment and training program, SNAP participants do have to meet basic work requirements, and unless they're, I've listed them here and I won't go through them all, unless they meet an exception. If they're a child or elderly, if they're physically or mentally unfit for employment, if they're receiving unemployment insurance, if they're already working more than 30 hours a week. The student rules are very complex, but some students can be exempted from work requirements. But just keep in mind that a large population of the SNAP caseload has to meet some basic work requirements. Next slide, please. Those work requirements include registering for work, accepting a job if offered, not voluntarily quitting a job, things like that. It also includes SNAP employment and training. So that's one part of the work requirements that many adults may face in a state. States have a lot of flexibility, though, around their SNAP employment and training programs, so it's very difficult to draw generalities across all states about here's what SNAP E&T means, because it can mean very, very different things in different states. And so one thing to do, of course, is to figure out what your state is already doing around SNAP employment and training, and then tailor your thoughts about integrating it with WIOA from there. One of the things that the states have flexibility around is who to assign employment and training activities. States can essentially choose anybody who doesn't meet one of those exceptions and either offer an employment and training activity, which we would consider a voluntary employment and training activity for somebody, or assign an individual to have to participate in an employment and training activity, and we call those mandatory programs. It doesn't have to assign anybody any of those to any activity at all. It can really, a state can choose to target its activities to the individuals it wants to target. If a state does choose what we call a mandatory program and assigns an individual to an employment and training, there are certain rules a state has to follow. A state has to assess an individual to determine what the appropriate activity is. How that happens at a state can vary widely, from very cursory sort of assessments to very in-depth and useful assessments. If a state assigns somebody to employment and training, they have to reimburse an individual for expenses that are reasonable and necessary to participate. I believe this is relatively unique, or at least a very important feature of SNAP employment and training. And what it means is if an individual has childcare costs, transportation costs or other costs identified by the state, you know, the cost of a uniform, certain fees for participating, whatever it might be. And if those are necessary to be able to, for the individual to take part in the activity, the state has to reimburse them for those costs. In addition, if a state does assign somebody to an activity, that means if a person fails to comply with the activity without good cause, they could lose benefits. And states have a range of what that sanction or penalty can be. It can be 1 month to 3 months for the first time, and it can be up to permanently banned from participating in the SNAP program for individuals who have repeatedly failed to comply with their employment and training activity. So there's potentially high risk to individuals if a state has a mandatory employment and training program. Next slide, please. I want to shift to that another category where states may be focusing or thinking about their employment and training activities, and that's that group of able-bodied adults without dependents. These individuals are limited to 3 months of benefits in a 3-year period unless they're working or participating in a qualifying job activity for 20 hours a week, or they could do work fare. There are some additional exceptions to that requirement. For instance, if somebody's physically or mentally unfit for work. What makes this a really harsh rule for states, though, is there's no requirement for states to actually provide that job training activity. So if the state has this rule in place, individuals have to find 20 hours of work or job training, and the state may or may not actually help in doing that. One of the reasons they may not is they may not have the money or funds or resources or program slots to put people into things, and so the individuals are kind of out of luck, and they may hit their time limit and lose benefits. This time limit was waived during the recession because I think there was an acknowledgement there weren't jobs out there, and job training programs are swamped and stressed. So in many states, they haven't had to deal with this rule. However, the rule's coming back into effect as the waivers that they were able to receive are expiring. Next slide, please. So I'll sort of race through this just to show you the drastic scale. We estimate at least 1 million individuals will lose their SNAP benefits because of this 3-month rule by 2016, which is a tremendous blow to the program and certainly means a lot of individuals may be scrambling on the SNAP side of things because of the rule. This is sort of what the country looked like during the recession and immediately after the recession. The dark blue means the state did not have to impose this 3-month time limit. You can see most of the country was able to waive the entire state from the time limit. Light blue means that the state was able to waive at least parts of the state from the time limit. If you look closely, you can see Delaware as the only state in white, which means they've had that time limit in effect. They're the only state that has had the time limit in effect consistently. Next slide. Here's what we're looking at in 2016 based on our estimates. Almost every state loses their statewide waiver. Many won't have any kind of a waiver. Those are the white states. And the light blue states will have some kind of a waiver if they choose to waive out areas of high unemployment that qualify. The point is a drastic change in the SNAP program. Underlying this is a need for people to find 20 hours of qualifying training activities. Next slide, please. Here's what we've seen in states that have had this time limit come back into effect. This is SNAP participation in Kansas on the left and Oklahoma on the right. You can see when the time limit actually came back into effect, which is that vertical dotted red line, the immediate next month after the 3-month time limit, participation plummeted. So lots of people lose benefits. There's additional states showing the same pattern, so we're very worried about states that are losing these waivers because of the impact on SNAP. Next slide, please. And I won't have time to go through this in detail. I just want to point out here's the folks that are affected by this time limit based on the limited information we have about who these people are. But if you're talking to your state SNAP agency or thinking about SNAP E&T and the state is dealing with this time limit coming back into effect, here are the folks that are going to need 20 hours of qualifying job activity. And I should just mention that those qualifying job activity cannot include job search or job search training for the most part. Which would be a relatively low-touch way of reaching these folks. So they would need some other kind of training to be able to get those 20 hours. Very poor, not eligible for other benefits, so SNAP is a huge part of their safety net. Many of them may have children. if you look at in Ohio where the time limit came back into effect, they assessed every individual in one county, and they identified these other kinds of barriers to employment. So it's a population that can be very difficult to serve because they're not necessarily connected to the workforce. Some of them might be, but many of them face pretty important barriers. Next slide. So I think that's going to be something that a lot of SNAP agencies are grappling with over the next year or so, in addition to perhaps thinking about how they can partner with WIOA organizations in the WIOA planning process. But just to give you one last bit of context, here's recent sort of activities in SNAP employment and training, just to show you where the focus is for many states. You can see that job search and job search training make almost 2/3 of all slots funded through employment and training for SNAP. Workfare is very significant. Keep in mind, this from 2011 is during a period of time when that 3-month time limit was not in effect in most of the states. So many states actually were encouraging sort of voluntary programs which people could self-select and sort of get the job training and sort of skills building that they would need to find jobs. But even then, those were a relatively small part of a state's SNAP E&T activities. So I think that's not only my time, but my last slide. Is that correct? Next slide, please. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Ed. Thanks for that important context on how E&T fits into the larger SNAP program and some of the issues that SNAP E&T programs are facing that partners should be aware of as they participate in the WIOA planning process with SNAP E&T programs. So now that we have the kind of big picture on WIOA and SNAP E&T, we're going to turn to an example from the states. And we're going to be talking with Bill Seedman and Alice Pritchard about the state of Connecticut. So we're going to start with Bill Seedman, who is going to provide some background on Connecticut's SNAP Employment and Training Program and talk a bit about their program and how they're partnering with others in the workforce system and their seat at the table in terms of WIOA planning. Bill?
Hi, thank you. Bill Seedman here, State of Connecticut. Before I get started, I just want to thank the National Skills Coalition for inviting us to participate in the webinar series. I found the previous webinars to be interesting and informative, and hopefully today's participants will gain a greater knowledge of SNAP E&T and how it fits in with the WIOA planning, especially here in Connecticut. As you can see on this first slide, we refer to our program as Your Path to Employment. At its core, it's a program built around partnership. SNAP recipients in Connecticut are a diverse group. We know that not everyone's path will look the same. Some have recent employment history, while others may not have worked in a long time, or maybe never. One of the great things about SNAP E&T, and I think Ed may have mentioned this, is the flexibility states have to design and run a program that best suits the needs of its residents and employers. SNAP E&T, it was mentioned, there are 2 funding streams, the 100% grant allocation and the 50% reimbursement. When we talk about our program, it's kind of like talking about 2 programs under the same umbrella. May I have the next slide, please? This slide shows all of our E&T partners, our current E&T partners, and their contact information. As you can see, if you can count quickly, we're working with 11 organizations, and they're helping us serve our SNAP population. But what you see is basically a PowerPoint version of our promotional poster that hangs in all 11 DSS service centers. We use it to help get the word out about our program. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a list of our current lineup of 100% contractors. It includes Career Resources, Community Renewal Team, the Kennedy Center, one of our Workforce Investment Boards, and Workforce Alliance. These 100% contractors are currently providing various E&T components. Ed mentioned a few. Our contractors do assessments, education, vocational and occupational training, structured job search, and work experience. These are performance-based contracts, and there's even an incentive payment for every person who gains employment. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, shown here are our 50% reimbursement partnerships that have been formed to provide short-term vocational programs. On one of Ed's slides, he described 3 different views of employment and training. We would have fallen into the 3rd category. We're very interested in skilling up our SNAP recipients with the idea that in the long term it will lead to less reliance on SNAP and allow people to permanently enter the workforce. So far, we've partnered with 4 community colleges, 1 private college, and a community-based organization. Our longest-running partnership is with Capital Community College. They're located in downtown Hartford in a former department store. It's a beautiful campus, and it's located on a bus line, so it's easily accessible. At last count, Capital Community College is offering 22 vocational training programs. They have culinary arts, CNA, certified pharmacy tech, medical billing and coding, fields that have been identified as growing fields in the Connecticut economy. Connecticut's a relatively small state, but even within Connecticut, different regions have different growing occupations. Our newest partnership is the one on the bottom, Northwestern Connecticut Community College. They're located in the northwestern section of our state. Another beautiful campus. Like most of our new partners, when they started, they're starting out relatively small with 7 programs. I believe they already have 3 job placements. They've only been in the business for a few months. We value all of these partnerships and believe they are the key to skilling up SNAP participants that so that they can truly become self-reliant and less dependent on SNAP. Next slide, please. So this one is meant to illustrate the various elements needed for successful outcomes. It was suggested that it resembles a martini glass, but we really look at it as a way of putting in various pieces depending on the needs of the individual SNAP recipient, whereas some may be better suited for a community college, others who are more job ready, a recent job history, they feel they're ready to begin employment now, might work with an E&T contractor, the support services that we provide, the DSS SNAP participants themselves, and finally our WIOA alignment. As you'll see at the bottom of the funnel, the successful outcome would equal skills, which would lead to family supporting employment, and ultimately self-reliance. Before we move on to our involvement with WIOA planning, I want to briefly mention an important decision that states must make, and it's been mentioned already, but that's whether or not to run a mandatory or voluntary employment and training program. In Connecticut, we chose to run a voluntary program, and we made the choice for a few reasons. The primary reason we chose to go voluntary is our belief that it would lead to better outcomes. Yeah, many states do have mandatory programs, but we in Connecticut think that when people self-initiate and they participate in an activity that they want to participate in, they're going to be more motivated and more likely to complete the program, gain the skills they need to succeed in the Connecticut job market. Another reason to go voluntary, and this is more self-serving, is to reduce the administrative burden on the eligibility side of the operation. After all, just because you make a program mandatory doesn't mean that everyone will participate. The regs have several pages on what happens if a mandatory participant does not participate. It does include sanctions, due process, fair hearings. It's a real administrative burden. Here in Connecticut, we work very hard to make sure that people who need nutrition assistance, we get it in a timely fashion. We feel that the worker capacity that would be lost in running a mandatory program would harm folks who need assistance timely. The capacity of our eligibility staff is better utilized to ensure that we are meeting the federal performance measures, program access, payment accuracy, and the like. Okay, I'll segue now into how SNAP E&T has been involved in the WIOA planning process here in Connecticut. We've been involved since the beginning. Personally, I first learned about WIOA the old-fashioned way. I read it in the paper. Actually, I first learned about WIOA from a CLASP email. It was just about a year ago when WIOA became law. Here in Connecticut, our State Department of Labor has taken the lead on WIOA planning. We were invited to the initial planning meetings, and we've been involved ever since. I believe SNAP E&T may have ridden on the coattails of our TANF program, but in any case, no matter how we got to the table, we're happy to be there. DOL has kept us in the loop since day one. As a collaborative partner, we will continue to participate in planning meetings, assist WIOA clients with access to DSS public assistance programs, keep others apprised of SNAP E&T activities, and help monitor WIOA funds that will be serving clients on public assistance. As a program that serves low-income people, we want to inform and advise the core and mandatory partners of what our program offers. Our State Department of Labor has formed 4 work groups, and I'm happy that SNAP E&T is part of the Service Design and Delivery Group. We're actually having our first meeting on Thursday. We view alignment as a good thing. For us, it's not just about compliance, but effectiveness. And that'll wrap up my presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill, for giving us that background on all of the work that is happening in Connecticut in terms of your SNAP E&T program. We're going to, before we turn into the facilitated discussion, I wanted to ask Alice Pritchard to give us some information from an advocate's perspective on what's happening with WIOA planning more broadly in the state of Connecticut so that we have that perspective. And Alice helps organize the campaign for a working Connecticut in addition to her role as executive director at her organization. So Alice, can you just give us a kind of big picture advocacy view on WIOA planning in Connecticut, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brooke. I just want to say that the campaign has a very aligned mission with some of the goals that Ed mentioned around SNAP E&T, but also WIOA's goals around getting people skills that lead to good jobs with good wages that meet employer demand. And so WIOA is a natural place for us to look for solutions to some of the economic challenges that we face in the state of Connecticut. And the process to date has been largely internal to the state agencies, but we have been kind of standing in a ring around the outside, waiting for the opportunity to bring some of the players who are part of our coalition to the table as well. In particular, groups like adult literacy providers who, though there is a title under WIOA that speaks to the issues of adult literacy, those providers have been in their own kind of silo for decades, and so are looking forward to the opportunity to bring their resources and ideas and experience to the table to serve those who have limited English proficiency perhaps or low basic skills, and help to get them into the pipeline of services that have been traditionally offered under Title I in WIOA, or in WIA, but now will be in WIOA. I think also that we're looking for opportunities for groups like housing providers who have been serving families who are trying to stabilize their housing, but one of the ways in which they do that is by securing strong jobs that lead to economic security for their families and therefore housing stability. So hoping that groups like housing providers will also be able to eventually get to the table. And also that thinking about the fact that not just do we need to be bringing providers to the table, but recognizing that SNAP in particular is a place where individuals have gone in hard times for resources, and that they may be exactly the types of people we would like to be serving under WIOA, but have never crossed the path of or crossed into a OneStop or American Job Center. So it may also be an opportunity for us in the workforce system to identify out-of-school youth who are a primary target population under WIOA, as well as those with English language deficiencies, disabilities, and other barriers to employment. By reaching out to the SNAP agency, we may be able to make connections that have been previously unfulfilled as we go through this WIOA planning process. So we're hopeful in particular that everybody will be able to provide some input at different points in the planning process in Connecticut to talk about what they see as the barriers to employment and potential solutions, and just hoping that the group that gets involved will be broader than the traditional groups of us who have been hanging around the workforce system for a long time, and in this case we'll start to include those such as housing providers, reentry providers, et cetera, that could have a role to play as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Alice. That was really important context and a great segue into one of the first discussion questions that I have, which is really focused on opportunities to partner with a one-stop delivery center. So one-stop centers, which are also sometimes called American Job Centers, are supposed to provide a range of education, training, and supportive service programs, or at least access to the range of programs at a one-stop center. And in fact, WIOA includes a list of programs that are required to be partners in the one-stop system. SNAP E&T isn't a required partner, but it is a permissible one. WIOA also includes an enhanced priority of service, which is a requirement to ensure that public benefits recipients and other low-income individuals receive priority for WIOA career and training services through the one-stop delivery system. So these are opportunities to think about how the one-stop delivery system and American Job Centers can serve individuals who are receiving public benefits or have other barriers to work. Ed, I was wondering if we could start with you, and I was wondering if you could give us your perspective on how the priority of service requirements can help ensure that SNAP participants, including the ABOD population that you discussed previously, have access to a variety of employment and training services. Are there particular opportunities for the SNAP program to work with the American Job Centers to provide access to employment and training services that are offered under WIOA?
Sure. I think my initial thought is that, yes, it's an opportunity, in part because I think in the past, some SNAP agencies have struggled to try to integrate with employment and training efforts outside of SNAP. And I think some of that is due to the fact that, like I said, the employment and training program for SNAP is it's a part of a much larger nutrition program. And so sometimes you'll find, like, who's the person at the state that works on employment and training? Oh, it's one person. They also are in charge of nutrition education, and they're also doing this or that. And so they often don't have the capacity at the state level in SNAP to understand what all the options are and the best ways to connect SNAP participants to services outside of their agency. Again, keep in mind, every state is different when it comes to SNAP E&T, and so in some cases there have been good partnerships for years with workforce investment boards and other programs. But I would just say in general, a lot of states have had very limited connections outside of the SNAP agency, and some concern that if they have tried to connect SNAP participants to like one-stops, they don't know what happens to them, and they sometimes worry about what kinds of services they're actually getting. So to the degree that WIOA really does put a priority on serving low-income folks who are likely to be SNAP participants, and clearly offers an opportunity for SNAP agencies to be part of the planning process, it is a great invitation. And I think you know, states that have the capacity and have some connection, when I say states, I mean state SNAP agencies have the capacity and some connection, can really benefit from the fact that SNAP participants now can be considered in a way that maybe they hadn't been in the past. You know, when it comes to sort of barriers, you know, that same sort of siloing where SNAP E&T operates with the SNAP agency is still going to be a struggle, I think. And, you know, the SNAP E&T has a current planning process that requires yearly plans submitted to the Food and Nutrition Services of SNAP, and funding is actually allocated based on those yearly plans. So I know that WIOA, probably wisely, looks a little further out for, I think it's 4-year plans, and sort of reconciling how all that works could certainly be a barrier, but it will never be surmounted without a conversation where the SNAP agency can be at the table. And so that's why I think it's a good opportunity, again, for some states, and some states a chance to improve what they're already doing, and for some states probably something where it will be a struggle to happen.
Great, thanks, Ed. Bill, you already talked about, you know, the role that you've started to play and others in SNAP E&T have started to play in terms of participating in the WIOA planning process there in Connecticut. Can you give us a sense of how Connecticut is thinking, or at least from your perspective, how you're thinking about opportunities to partner with the one-stop delivery system?
Sure. Being at the WIOA table, you know, gives us the opportunity to inform and advise not only the one-stops, but everybody else who's at the table, the entire workforce system. As a non-core partner, we're still exploring how we might be involved with the one-stop system. Ed mentioned ABODs. Connecticut, as was illustrated on the map, is one of the states that's going from dark blue to light blue, meaning that we'll be losing our statewide ABOD exemption. We're currently planning for that transition. In fact, I have a member of our ABOD transition team, Todd Mallard, with me now. You know, as we built our program, and it has grown in the year to year, but our total budget combined in 2015 would be about $2.5 million, and when you compare that with $700 million in direct SNAP benefits, it's not that different from comparing $250 million nationwide with the $80 billion total budget. The point is, DSS is in the business of providing nutrition assistance. I am that one guy at DSS. I have 2 colleagues as well, but we're looking to the one-stops for their expertise in helping people find employment. This will especially be important as we identify ABODs who will be subject to the 3-month time limit. We want those folks to have real options. In our voluntary program, any SNAP recipient can engage with any one of our partners. However, we recognize that there are certain geographic challenges, and in fact, many of our E&T partners are located in areas that will remain exempt if our partial waiver request is approved. That being said, there are numerous one-stop in Connecticut, and we think they'll be a real asset to our population. We always hope that employees at the one-stops would disseminate information about SNAP nutrition assistance to its customers. We now hope that by being involved in the WIOA planning process, there'll be a much better understanding about what SNAP E&T offers.
Great, thanks, Bill. Yeah, those are all really important points about leveraging the services that are available at the American Job Centers to provide access to a broad array of employment and training services that may be outside of the SNAP E&T program. Alice, in your comments, you started to touch on some opportunities for SNAP E&T to partner with the one-stop delivery system. As a workforce advocate and WONC, what do you see as some advantages of partnering with the one-stop system?
Well, I think in particular, and Bill was kind of setting it up there, that the opportunity to connect to the business services that are available through the one-stop system, I think is particularly critical. I think they are, at least in Connecticut, but I know across the country, there are workforce boards and they're one-stop systems who are focused on sector strategies, and so they have deepening relationships with healthcare employers and manufacturing employers and transportation and logistics, et cetera. And so those opportunities are well known to those systems, and they can help to connect individuals who are on SNAP or on SNAP E&T to connect to those opportunities. So I think that in particular, those sets of services are really helpful. In addition to the things, the general support services, some of the, universally available services that are available for the job search experiences additionally, but I think that the most important probably is that connection or potential connection to real-time employment opportunities, and so I would say that would be the biggest one.
Great, thank you. So in addition to the one-stop system itself, the workforce system, as we talk about it, is much broader, although clearly American Job Centers are an important piece of it. There's also community colleges, there's nonprofit providers, there's other education and training providers, there's adult education organizations, lots of different types of organizations that make up a state's workforce development system broadly. And as I already discussed in some of my remarks, SNAP E&T can help participants build skills that lead to family supporting jobs by partnering with community colleges, community-based organizations, and other education and training providers. And of course, we heard a bit of this from Bill when he was describing Connecticut's SNAP E&T partnerships with community colleges. I think that WIOA provides an opportunity for SNAP E&T to identify new partners and build on efforts to really create skill-building strategies for SNAP participants, and the planning process is an opportunity to start to identify some of those partners. So, Bill, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how Connecticut partners with its community colleges through the SNAP E&T program, and whether you're using the WIOA process or some of the connections you might be making with other education and training providers to expand skill building opportunities for SNAP E&T participants.
Yes. In 2012, as part of a strategic improvement plan here at DSS, SNAP became a standalone division. What that means is our commissioner appointed a dedicated SNAP director, and we formed our own division. SNAP E&T existed prior to the formation of the division, but in 2012 it really started getting the attention it deserved. We had 2 partnerships in place, and we set a goal and a strategy for expansion. Our goal was to partner with each of the 12 community colleges in Connecticut, and we've slowly and methodically expanded our program by reaching out to deans of workforce development. Along the way, we've found ourselves a few champions. As Nantucket Community College, they've paved the way for us to meet and explain our program at statewide meetings with all of the deans from the community colleges. These successful partnerships usually begin with a simple conversation, but we recognize that community colleges in themselves cannot serve all of the needs, so we're open to non-college partnerships as well. And being at the WIOA table and aligning ourselves with the planning process, we hope to make a lot of key connections that will open up doors for non-college partnerships that will help us further our goal.
Great, thanks, Bill. Alice, are there other ways that you see using the WIOA planning process as an opportunity to identify potential partners for SNAP E&T that can offer quality education and training services?
Well, I've been trying to figure out whether there's, again, a role for employers in this, and I think maybe there's an opportunity to to braid funding that may now finally be available under the workforce under WIOA around incumbent worker training, because I do think that there are a number of employers, sadly, who have SNAP recipients among their workforce, and they know it, particularly at some of those entry-level wages. There are families that are still availing themselves of SNAP and could potentially also be availing themselves of SNAP E&T. And so wondering if there isn't an opportunity to be explored here around how do you get employers to identify, again in a voluntary way, employees who might be interested in participating in skill building opportunities and do it as an incumbent worker rather than as a new job seeker type of activity, which would allow them to skill up, stay with their own employer, and it just seems to me could be a win-win. So trying to think about how that might be you know, a new way of bringing some of the attention to incumbent worker training also in partnership with SNAP E&T. So just one of the things that I think employers might be able to be involved in, and they do use community colleges and other providers when they do incumbent worker training, but they also may use other vendors that could be in the program as well. So just something again to think about is beyond our traditional engagement of community colleges and four-year colleges and the like. The other thing I would actually just say too, that just made me remember, I had wanted to point out that I think it's important that we build skill building opportunities that are not all at the very entry level. If we look at data from a number of people who have been unemployed over the last several years and those who are in the housing system and others, there are lots of people who have already completed their high school diploma and even some college work, and so we need to make sure that we're building opportunities, as Bill suggested, not just on the continuing ed side where they might be getting a short-term non-credit certificate, but also helping people to, you know, complete degrees that they may have started pursuing and stopped, so that we can get them the best shot at the best jobs possible.
Hey, can I just chime in? This is Ed. I think I love the idea of sort of skilling up already working folks and understanding that they may need some additional assistance. It's a great example of why a voluntary SNAP E&T program is a good approach for states that may currently have mandatory programs or aren't quite sure what they have, because if they're working more than 30 hours a week in that job, an individual will be exempt from a mandatory program, as I mentioned, but anybody is eligible for a voluntary program. So if you want to target a certain group of people, it may in fact be people that would otherwise be exempt, and the only way to do that is to offer a voluntary or sort of self-initiated program.
Yeah, those are very good points, and I think segue nicely into the next and final question that I want to ask before we start taking questions from the webinar participants with our remainder of our time. And this question is really focused on career pathways. So WIOA requires states and local areas to develop career pathways, and this is a strategy that's new in WIOA that we didn't see explicitly in the previous Workforce Investment Act. Just to provide a summary description of career pathways, career pathways are really a combination of education, training, career counseling, and supportive services that align with the skill needs of industries, and they enable an individual to attain a secondary school diploma or its recognized equivalent and a post-secondary credential. And the idea behind career pathways is that you can enter and exit at different stages as a participant, and so maybe you are somebody who doesn't have a job and is looking for an entry-level middle skill job, and you're looking to build the skills to do that work, or maybe you're an incumbent worker who needs to get skilled up while you're working. I mean, that's the idea behind career pathways. So I was curious, Alice, building on some of the comments you made about skill building partnerships, do you see additional opportunities for building career pathway approaches under WIOA?
Absolutely. I think that there are lots of individuals who are in these planning processes across the country who are talking about how to start from where people are, and so certainly wanting to look at starting career pathways at the high school attainment level and being able to move people up through opportunities to do short-term training as well as potentially degree work, and with employment opportunities at different stages of that career pathway. I think that the that WIOA also calls for, as we've talked about, a lot of attention to sector strategies and to employer engagement, and it's very important as we're doing the planning. I would say that we engage employers in a discussion about career pathways. We certainly don't want to build things that won't lead us where we want to go, and the employment landscape is always changing. So I think the other thing we have to be clear of is just because we send it off in a 4-year plan to the feds, that we don't consider it a work in progress all the time, because the career pathways should change to meet new employer expectations. So I think that WIOA, the nice thing about WIOA is it gives us a new opportunity to plan. It's been a long time that we have been kind of avoiding planning because we were waiting for WIA to be reauthorized. So I think this is a nice opportunity and to get back to the table and talk about what participants really need out of the system, and how to provide them with opportunities to get on and off of the pathway with credentials along the way. And I would say I think we need to be really honest with ourselves about the fact that we have been creating credentials that may not be the industry recognized, employer recognized ones that are going to really get people the return on investment. And though there are other great stepping stones along the way, I think we need to make really clear that the pathway includes lots of meaningful, employable certificates for people, so that they get really the jobs, that the experiences and the jobs that they need.
Great, thanks, Alice. And just to close us out on this topic, before I turn it over to Ashley to take questions, Bill, do you have thoughts on how SNAP E&T can be integrated into career pathway approaches, or is there anything Connecticut is working on to integrate your programming into career pathways there?
So it's interesting that we named we refer to our program as your pathway to employment. We coined that phrase before we knew about the term career pathways. But I really agree with the points that Alice made. We used the slide showing the funnel, but we could have also created a slide showing stepping stones or a pathway. It's very important to have the employer perspective, because we certainly don't want that pathway to lead to continued dependence on SNAP. We try to have programs that are recognized by the Department of Labor or the Workforce Investment Boards as growing fields. But it's been such a great conversation today. For the longest time, we've really been trying to build the entire pathway ourselves, come up with all of the support services. Through the WIOA planning process, it's just come home that there are so many other potential partners out there and so many folks doing such good work that we should be looking outside of just our own program to make career pathways really pay off.
Great. I think that was a terrific note to end our facilitated discussion on. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ashley Shaw, who is going to be asking questions that were submitted by the webinar participants. Ashley, go ahead.
Thank you, Brooke. I believe for our first question, this can be answered by anyone. I've gotten a couple of these that came into the queue. What is workfare?
I can take a stab at that. From the SNAP perspective, workfare means essentially working off your benefits in a sort of government, or it can be a nonprofit or community-based organization. So it would be things like cleaning the streets or at a food bank sorting food. And for SNAP, it means doing that for the number of hours that your benefit represents divided by your local minimum wage. So if you get $100 of SNAP benefits, your local minimum wage is $10 an hour, you could be required to do 10 hours of workfare.
Great, thank you.
I could jump in on that one as well. This is Bill. Yeah, Ed nailed it on the head. That's somewhat seen as a more punitive type of program. And that's why the rules are in effect, because they don't want to displace regular paid employment. But in Connecticut, if you're a single person and you're receiving $194 in SNAP benefits, Our minimum wage will be increasing to $9.65 per hour in January. That would roughly equate to 23 hours per month that somebody would, that would be the maximum they would have to work to maintain their benefits. It may lead to paid employment, but really my feeling is that workfare is more of just, well, those are for the mandatory states to, make their people work for their benefits.
Great, thank you so much, you two. Our next question is, are there special procedures that need to be followed for involving SNAP-eligible older youth, 18 to 24, in employment and training programs?
This is Brooke. I'm not sure. This is a good question, and we can look into the question specifically around procedures. Under WIOA, under WIOA Title I, youth activities, there is activities for out-of-school youth, and those are employment and training activities provided under WIOA Title I that are focused on out-of-school youth. And of course, there are out-of-school youth that may be SNAP eligible, and so there may be some overlap between an out-of-school individuals who are out-of-school youth and are also SNAP eligible. In terms of particular provisions that were asked about, that's not something that I know about specifically. I'm not sure, Ed or Alice, if either of you are aware of that.
I think it would be good to get the answer to that question from the folks that know the most about these things, but I do think it's an interesting way in which we might be able to reach that population of young people who have been really challenging to engage.
And from the SNAP perspective, there might be a few instances where individuals 18 or 19 could be exempt from mandatory SNAP E&T, but other than that, there's no specific rules for that population.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Our next question is for Bill Seidman. You mentioned supportive services. What all does that entail, and who pays for it?
Based on the individual's needs, supportive services may include child care, transportation, materials, supplies. We're allocated funds to help pay for that. We can also help organizations leverage their existing funds through our 50% match program. There's some state funds available, but oftentimes we're matching foundation funds or funds that organizations are already utilizing to provide those support services.
And I can chime in on the broader SNAP perspective because, Bill's doing a great job in Connecticut with, I think, what is a model program. But states have lots of flexibility around supportive services. If it's a mandatory E&T program, the state has to provide the sort of necessary costs for the individual to get to that service. And that's where it could be child care, transportation, fees, or whatever it might be. And that's a 50-50 match that the feds will reimburse the state 50% of the costs of doing that. If it's a voluntary program, a state can decide to offer those services, but if they fail to do it, then of course the individual doesn't have to go and there's no consequence. And again, those are 50-50 funds. If a state decides to offer child care, transportation at a limit that it can set, then an individual has those expenses, can be reimbursed by the state, and the state can get 50% of that reimbursement from the feds in the SNAP E&T program.
Yeah, and I'd just like to, this is Bill, piggyback off of Ed's comments. Each of our partners brings some of their own supports that are already in place. For instance, one of our community colleges has on-site child care that's free to students at the college. Our participants are viewed as students of the college, and they're able to utilize that support services. A community college has their own bus transportation system. They call it the Magic Bus. Students in this college are able to utilize those support services. One of our college partners even has a psychologist on staff, and our students are able to meet with that psychologist and discuss any issues they may be having in their personal lives, class-wise. So depending on the partnership, various supports are in place. But yes, Ed nailed it. Under the voluntary program, we do try to provide the support so students can successfully complete the program.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how has the Connecticut program addressed low literacy levels that prohibit participants from enrolling in vocational programs offered by their community college partners?
Thank
Alice,
you. That's a good. Oh,
I'm sorry, Bill. Do you want to take a turn, and then Alice, this is Brooke. I was going to ask if you could follow that up by just explaining what adult ed services are available generally in Connecticut as well.
Alice, do you want to take that?
Sure, and then you can add on. So in Connecticut, we have adult literacy services that are available largely through our school districts that are available in every town. That does not mean that there's a slot for everybody who would like them in every town, but it is free of charge to individuals who are able to get a spot in those programs. And so that's been an interesting. We've been talking about this a little bit in that because that is a free service, it isn't something that fits into the 50-50 model in terms of being reimbursed. And so I think we're going to need to get clever about this if we're going to bring more adult literacy providers into the funding mix of 50-50. But I do think even if we can't figure out how to bring them into the funding mix, they certainly could be part of a continuum of services where the adult literacy activities are going on, but then individuals are able to move into the SNAP E&T programs that may be bridges. And we certainly in Connecticut have been doing things like IBEST programs and other contextualized learning programs for those who have a high school diploma but are not quite yet ready for college level work. And so I think we need to do some thinking about how we might leverage those activities even if we can't use the 50-50 funding to support every step of the way. But recognizing that we don't have programs in Connecticut usually that charge you to get your high school diploma, and that's a good thing, but it does then make it difficult to partner specifically with this funding opportunity. But Bill, you may have gotten around that a little bit, and particularly I think organizations like the OIC, which is one of your partners, does some of that bridge level work, I'm sure.
Yeah, so each of our college partners, they do their own assessment to determine if a student is, academically prepared to participate in one of the vocational programs. Not all students or not all interested participants are at that level. Some of our partners actually have remedial labs on site, and they will work with prospective students to try to bring them up to that level. It's common that they make referrals to adult basic education. We don't want people to simply be sent away. We don't want to lose them. But in essence, clients are sometimes referred out to complete their secondary to get their diploma or its equivalent. Our 100% contractors are able to work with clients as they pursue GED or ESL, and they're provided a case management, so again, performance-based contracts, and we will support a student for up to 5 months with case management through one of our 100% contractors.
Ashley, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Last question. At the national office level, is there any discussion on requiring states to offer more than just one E&T component?
This is Bill. I'm not aware of any requirement that you must offer more than one. I will mention that here in Connecticut, DSS has received tremendous support not only from the national office, but also our regional office. You know, the states have a great flexibility. Somewhere along the discussion today, it was mentioned that many states choose a soft touch. States really have the option to develop the program they want.
Yeah, that's right. I think at the national level, from the SNAP agency perspective, there's no current sort of push to either require a certain number of components or to require certain kinds of components, which is why states can go to, you know, essentially high sanction programs or do sort of intensive targeted and comprehensive programs, and sometimes they blend the two, and they may have a certain population or a certain part of the state where it's pretty much job search, and another part of the state where they may have some very rich programs. But I would note that in the Farm Bill a couple of years ago, which reauthorized the SNAP program, there was $200 million put aside for pilot projects in SNAP employment and training, and 10 states received grants recently to test innovative attempts to really improve the earnings and outcomes of SNAP participants, which is not something that the SNAP E&T program ever really required in the past. So those pilots, which are just getting underway, are by and large pretty comprehensive in providing a spectrum of services, generally pretty good about identifying who they're trying to serve, so they're not trying to be all things to all people, but identifying a population they think they can help, providing the sort of range of services, case management, real identification of what they might need, and then tracking to see if it works. And the whole idea behind that was to say, before we change SNAP E&T, which here in DC means cutting it essentially, but could mean, you know, requiring additional components or doing something good, let's test some ideas about how to really help people improve their earnings and get connected to the work world, and that would inform any future discussions about what SNAP E&T can be. So we're hopeful that those pilots will help push the conversation towards better state E&T programs, or eliminating or limiting the sort of sanction-oriented approaches, but right now it's kind of out there to be seen in the laboratory of the states in those 10 pilots.
Well, thank you so much. On that note, I do also just want to let folks know that National Skills Coalition, in partnerships with the Seattle Jobs Initiative, is providing technical assistance to 4 states that are looking to build skills-based SNAP E&T programs using a variety of education and training and support service components, and we are working with Connecticut as one of those states. And so looking forward to working with Connecticut on all of the great work that we're doing. With that said, I think we're out of time, and I'd like to thank our panelists, Ed, Bill, and Alice, so much for their participation on today's webinar, and to thank all of you who participated for participating as well. Just a reminder that a recording of this webinar will be available on our website, and I hope that everybody has a good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brooke.